Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we got something special. Another top 10 list. The top 10 worst hit songs of 2012. So I've said before that 2012 is probably among the best years of the Billboard Hot 100 this decade, and I actually stand by that. There was a plethora of fantastic songs, both well-remembered stalwarts and forgotten gems, and multiple genres were in the throes of transition, which gave indie music a breakthrough window to the benefit of everyone, especially the listening public. Pop, rock, R&B, hip-hop, country, they all notched real success, and above average overall, all of which bolstered the fact that there just wasn't that many awful hits this year. And even if they were here, by the overall standards of any other year, they didn't all seem that terrible. More grating production choices that have aged badly and some sloppy writing than anything offensive or an overwhelmingly bad taste. I mean, I could get angry at the worst of 2016. For the majority of this list, I just laugh at the worst of 2012. But we did get some bad songs, and it is worth pointing out where they came from. And really most are just clustered in saccharine music across pop country, and adult alternative that just utterly missed the point, or got really annoying, or in hip-hop where the genre was going in a transitional year between pop-rap club bangers and what would become the darker, heavier trap sounds throughout the rest of the decade. And it wasn't really helped by a few artists in particular having a really bad year in 2012, but I think it's time we get to the list proper. No more wasting time. As per usual, the songs had to debut on this year-end list to qualify for the Billboard Hot 100, So Sexy and I Know It by LMFAO is reserved for 2011, and if you previously saw my worst hits of 2012 originally published in text form on my blog way back in that year, I recommend you stick around regardless, as things have shifted a little bit. 2012 being 7 years ago, that'll do it to you. Okay, got that? Well, without any further ado, let's dig into a year that, for the most part, wasn't really that bad, starting off with number 10. One of the most fascinating shifts in popular culture is how it seems like we all turned back around on Pitbull. He started off okay, he came to monopolize the club boom, where the point where people just got sick of his braying idiocy. But then we realized he was at least making fun, dumb music, and then he was nearly gone. Unfortunately, in 2012, the backlash was kicking into full swing, and not without reasons. But when you find a song where even Pitbull isn't having any fun, you've got problems. Now granted, this isn't really a Pitbull song in its entirety. Originally this was cut by the Australian DJ and nasal annoyance on this song that is Havana Brown, with utterly disposable lyrics and a tinny, pulsating electro synth drop that somehow hits new depths of pulsating beep every time I hear it. And what's so bizarre is that the version that got big was the remix from Red One, normally a producer I respect and like, and still managed to bring his trademark pop bigness to the song until the echoing synth permeates your brain like a cancerous tumor. Normally this would be the point where I would look to Pitbull and say that he's really the saving grace here, except here's the thing. When the DJs left the clubs for the festivals, Pitbull always seemed to feel a little bit lost in trying to contain the atmosphere and vibes. It's not just here either. If you look to the other EDM adjacent songs that try to plaster him on for the pop crossover success, it's a bit of an awkward fit, to the point where I almost felt a little sympathetic for Pitbull ending his verse with a bark of "fuck you, pay me." I mean, he's not having any fun, why should I? Hell, he's probably just as annoyed with that synth line as I am. But the ironic part is that Pitbull's really the only presence, and the only reason why I remotely remember or care about this song. Just enough to put it on the list. Next, number 9. You know, I'm not too proud to admit that I actually own a Flo Rida album. I bought it myself, and even back then, when I came to the realization his music's disposable gunk, but it was at least fun disposable gunk. He had an uncanny knack for finding hooks, normally keeping through some gratuitous sampling, and I always thought his flows and rhymes didn't quite get as much credit as they really should. But you want to know the song that effectively killed any fondness I had for this guy?
Can you blow my whistle, baby, let me know. Girl, I'm gonna show you how to do it, and we start real slow.
So here's the thing. The running joke among a lot of music critics, particularly on YouTube, is that nobody has ever cared about Flo Rida's content beyond the hook. And when your hook is an extended blowjob reference that indicates that he might not understand how blowjobs work, and also indicating that he's going to show her how to do it, which raises all sorts of questions, you're already going to start at rock bottom there. But I'm going to do something a little different because, well, I could point out that the production is overcompressed, clipping gunk where the grain of that acoustic guitar and all those vocal filters, it's uncomfortably close against the gooey percussion line. Let's actually focus on the verses here. I mean, for one, he chose to start the verse first with somebody calling out for the trivial nonsense that he then admits. Why would someone deny liking people? But then adds that he's pulling his hamstring, putting it on her. And believe it or not, it actually gets worse. Because then on the second verse, he implies his Bugatti hits the same notes as his girl, describes her as his banjo, which aside from not being a wind instrument, it reminds me way more than it should of the line, "You strum me like a guitar" from Jessie J's Domino, a much better song. And it's all about the furthest thing from being sexy, or even all that funny, is the incoherence that's so mind-boggling to me, because you could literally walk away from this song thinking that Flo Rida pulled a muscle trying to fuck his car. So why isn't this higher on the list? Well, number 8. Ladies and gentlemen, a clusterfuck.
Turn up the music, just turn it up louder. Turn up the music, I need it in my life, yeah.
So in 2012, Chris Brown released Fortune, which is one of the worst albums of the 2010s by a considerable margin, and what should be best described as an experimental test in how many dying synthesizers that Chris Brown could do coke off of while still creating unlistenable noise. It's truly an excruciating, overlong experience, and Turn Up the Music is by no means the worst song on that album, but is still terrible, bastardizing a nursery rhyme so that Chris Brown can howl like a tased goat through layers of fractured autotune. Hell, the reason I'd argue this is actually worse than Whistle is because it sounds like everybody is in so much pain and nobody's having any fun in this club. Not at a tipping point towards a night that gets dark and dangerous and potentially exciting, but because the rabid Tasmanian devil that is Chris Brown is clawing over grimy synths in a beat that can't preserve any sense of scale, especially by the post-chorus drop, where all the hand claps are trying to bounce off this pitch-shifted bleep that will then amplify the annoyance tenfold. And all the percussion's so tinny. Chris Brown's warping warbles, they sound atrocious, especially by the bridge where he dials into all sorts of nasal creepiness. And that's before he tries making some of those yelping howls on the final hook, where you can almost see the bloodshot eyes, the nosebleed, and the overdose kicking in. And what's so gross is that this isn't even the worst song from Chris Brown on this list, but you know what? We'll get to that eventually. Number 7. You know, I've said it time and time again. If you want to land spots on this list, disappointment will often push you higher than just atrocity, especially when the disappointment is the harbinger of a career in freefall. And with the benefit of hindsight here, I expect this to be the first real controversial decision on this list. But considering what happened to her after this, I'd argue it clinches the spot enough.
I think I finally had enough. I think I maybe think too much. I think this might be it for us. Only one last kiss.
Alright, look, you all know that I'm a Pink fan. I've been a Pink's fan since my teenage years. She cleaned up in the 2000s consistently with some of the best hits of the decade. And while neither Fucking Perfect nor Raise Your Glass have held up that well, I still had hoped that her 2012 album would connect for me. And then I heard Blow Me One Last Kiss. And you know what, at least at first this song seemed to have a bit of potential. The rollick of the guitar almost sounded a little bit like another interpolation of Float On by Modest Mouse. There was some pulsating groove here, there was potential, and then the hook happens. A blast of overcompressed, tinny mush with that flat kick drum cutting through, somehow produced to make Pink sound as shrill and blaring as possible. This doesn't excuse her delivery here. She absolutely is trying to force the really upper end of her register and stack her lead so that the cracks don't really show through, even though they still do, and it still winds up inducing a headache every single time. But that might have been part of the point. Yeah, the song is about cutting loose in its kiss off, where you're hitting a tidal wave of emotion, just blowing this guy off once and for all. But what happened to any sense of groove or lyrical meter, where despite being a breakup song, we get the rote screaming of how she's had a shit day? Not the first time that Pink falls into blocky, half-formed poetry, more that's trying to project coolness for no good reason. Worse still is that it's way too easy to point to her last lead-off single, So What from Funhouse, and see a retread of the formula, but where that song balanced out its whirling bitterness with a playful sneer and a groove that only barely disguised the collapse in between the margins, this is just one-dimensional and really sloppy. A breakup that I'm all too happy to take if it would just make this stop and go away. And considering how many similar steps were taken for Pink in the rest of the 2010s, yeah, sorry fans, sorry to myself, there's plenty good reasons why this song is here. Number 6. So for the next song on this list, it's from Maroon 5. And I feel nowadays that should be a surprise to nobody. Oh, shocker, Maroon 5 is making hot garbage, what else is new? But while some would like to point to Moves Like Jagger with Christina Aguilera as the sellout moment, and One More Night as the overexposed single that solidified Adam Levine's douchebaggery, and really that album is terrible, that's one of the better songs on it, the truth is that Maroon 5 could occasionally lean into being assholes effectively, especially the groove materialized behind them. And for me, One More Night actually kind of works in that lane. I don't think it's nearly as bad as some people have put it out to be. Now, if you want the point where they really became insufferable, it's this.
I'm at a payphone trying to go home. All of my change I spent on you.
If you're looking for the precise moment where Maroon 5 irrevocably turned into the grating non-band which they've been for the majority of the 2010s, I point to Payphone. And on a fundamental level, it's an issue of framing. It's a song that's trying to sound yearning and wistful for good times after the relationship just crashed and burned, trying to get back to a safe place, or maybe reunite. The first verse seems to think that they can try. But then the hook dissolves into petulant bitching that highlights exactly why Adam Levine was dumped in the first place. And none of this flatters him. Forget the auto-tune, but being pissy with some of the most misplaced attempts at swearing and anger I've seen from the band, how is it that Wiz Khalifa, with all of his non-rhymes and focus more on his goddamn car, can sound more angry than Adam Levine? But even then, it's not even anger so much as just malformed arrogance that neither artist can convincingly sell, especially when paired with beyond basic rinky-dink production that decides to bury the keyboards and the strings behind the fizzy non-tune, which only somehow becomes tolerable when it sounds the most cheap and spare behind, what do you know about it, Wiz Khalifa. Now again, this is by no means the worst song that Maroon 5 would ever make. I'm not even sure it's the worst song coming off of Overexposed, but like with Pink, it was signaling the end of any hopes of consistent quality, stripping away the rock elements for a spare change, and turning Maroon 5 into a glorified Adam Levine solo project. And oh yeah, in case you can't tell at this point, it really sucks. Next, number 5. But coming back to Pitbull sounding like he's just not having any fun, yeah, no way we're gonna step this one.
Back in time.
Alright, look, I'm not against movie tie-in songs. Sometimes they can be fantastic and earn a respectable chart run. There might be one coming in 2019, just to forewarn you. But the best of these songs attempt to capture the grandeur or the atmosphere of their movie, or at the very least they don't succumb to the dreck passing for modern trends of the time. But the worst of these wind up like Back in Time, which is a stiff, empty clunker that only is memorable for its utter missteps. A sample pulled from the wrong decade and then integrated into the spongy fuzz of the percussion like a railroad spike into the liver, which only gets worse when the dubstep comes in to match with nothing. And then there's Pitbull, who runs out of interesting things to say about Men in Black 3 in record time. Again, all the more galling when there is an existing Will Smith Men in Black song that's actually pretty solid to this day, and then we don't talk about Men in Black 2 in any capacity. But even as Pitbull will phone in cheap rhymes as he clearly doesn't give much of a number 2. And look, I've seen Pitbull live. He's a consummate showman. When he is on, the energy is infectious. But we've already heard him when he's flat out annoyed to be on the song in the first place, and yet somehow it gets worse when you can tell that he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than talking about a sequel that a decade past its prime that has already been forgotten. Much like the Men in Black International sequel movie that dropped this year, and I guarantee the majority of you already forgot that existed. So yeah, okay, let's not go back in time. Although if we did, I doubt anyone would care about this. Then or now. Next, number 4. There's a part of me that always feels a little bit awkward when I'm dunking on an act that saw their career spiral out after only one real hit, especially when you hear at least some of it had to deal with label drama, and even more so when you hear that that label was Simon Cowell's factory of mediocrity, Psycho Music. But on the flip side, if the issue was sustainable quality, well...
I broke it out thinking you'd be crying. Now I feel like looking at you flying. I want you back, I want you back, want you back.
Alright, look, I get that there's an audience for this sort of thing that enjoys music at its most catty, capricious, and lightly toxic. It's called Nicki Minaj's fanbase. But cheap shots aside, it's not a vibe I can remotely appreciate, mostly because of how small, vainglorious, and cheap it all feels. And there's a similar bad taste I get from Cher Lloyd ragging on the ex that she plainly dumped for now wanting to date other people. I make a comparison to The Boy Is Mine, but that song had tension and great vocal harmonies and production that doesn't blow ass. Yeah, once again, Psycho's bottom of the barrel reputation for badly mixed gunk is right back at the forefront, with that goopy synth all over the pre-chorus and the hook where Cher Lloyd is trying to flow over a choppy groove that feels like the smarter thing is to actually bury the guitar rock behind compressed fizz. But it's Cher Lloyd's snotty, grunting delivery that kills any vibe for me. It's not raw or effectively snide like Kesha or Miley Cyrus, or convincing in conveying any sense of poise like Nicki Minaj can. It's got the feeling of endless reruns of My Super Sweet 16, or to put it in modern terms, the soundtrack to Tana Turns 21, and now I want to die. I'm not gonna say that I'm glad that Cher Lloyd's career hit a brick wall after that mediocre second album, but I'm not gonna say I'm sad about it either. Number 3. But on the topic of a band whose career should have been long dead by this point...
Oh, I swear to you, I'll be there for you. This is not a drive-by.
Alright, look, at this point we're starting to hit territory of songs that are so overexposed for their rancid awfulness by pretty much everyone that finding something new to say about them becomes a challenge. So let's take a step back and consider what DriveBy is trying to do conceptually. This is a song where Pat Monahan, after one night of presumably bad sex, has fallen so head over heels for this woman, where I imagine that she probably heard Hey Soul Sister and rightly skipped town, or maybe when he just sent the I just had sex tweet unironically that went viral, could be both, and yet when he happens to see her on the street sometime later, he thinks they should have a relationship now, and they should get down to banging again. But what's so galling is the framing, because Train clearly thinks this is all the most romantic thing in the universe. The video is particularly atrocious for framing all this as the whitest rom-com imaginable, with the whole ain't I a stinker nice guy stench swirling around it. It's the only way I can possibly explain why he compares his love to both garbage and drive-by shootings, why he tries to describe himself as shy while the song is anything but, and how the hook smuggles in the way you do me, which along with a pre-chorus admission how he didn't even really need her until he came to, it's just got enough leering ickiness that makes everyone want to reach for the mace. And while the lyrics are the sort of inflated bowel cancer that everybody points out, I should also mention that the vocals on the hook lose all their flavor thanks to all that compression. The instrumentation really has no warmth or deeper texture, especially on the hook. The production is the definition of whitewashed blandness, and outside the vocal line, there's just not much of a tune even here, which means all the focus goes on the lyrics. You know, exactly where the focus should not be. Of course, this raised the question of whether this is worse than Hey Soul Sister, which might come up in a later piece for reasons, but as it is, this could have easily been the worst hit song of 2012. But what two songs can beat it? Number 2. Okay, so the reason why this song makes my list, let alone so high, it's a little personal. I think it's time I fully articulate why, because rationally, while this is terrible, many don't have the same level of venom I do towards this particular track. Hell, a lot of people would argue that it's way too boring to draw out that level of hatred. But the devil's in the details of this one, folks, and I want to highlight it in full because art draws out emotions that are valid in the subjective conversation of the art. So, Fall of 2012, my longtime girlfriend at the time and I split up. On a rational level, it was mutual and really the right decision, but emotionally at the time, I still had real feelings, so that does not go away overnight. And there were two adult alternative songs that I heard a lot around that time that touched on some of those emotions. One being really good, that was Not Over You by Gavin DeGraw, which if you saw my 2012 best hits of that year list, you understand why I dug that song so much. But on the flip side, we got this. A song that on its surface seemed to lean into the same emotionality even further, but yet did so in a way that revealed itself as so much more toxic with every single word.
Well, I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough.
Full disclosure, I've never liked Jason Mraz. When he did his rap thing, it was humiliating to everyone involved, but it was a moment in time. I see how he got his audience. But that time faded, and he switched to making gutless, mindless gunk to feed into the adult alternative meat grinder, and he somehow found even more success. Most because there's always an audience for saccharine garbage. And by that standard, this song might actually seem to be punching higher. It's got a real crescendo. Jason Mraz is trying to sell this with some genuine sincerity. He's got some yearning organic swell behind him. It's framed to be so damn romantic, and yet it makes my stomach turn. Again, this is a song post-breakup where he's trying to make a swing to win her back, to be so grand and romantic. But he does so in ways that are so cloying, hackneyed, and emotionally manipulative that only induces more bile when you realize how many people bought into it. Seriously, on the first verse he asks, "How old is your soul?" And while the second verse implies that he's willing to give her space, by the pre-chorus he says, "Even the stars burn and fall to earth." And given how he compared them to stars originally in the first verse, extending the metaphor, it implies if she leaves him to find space, she's burned out and has a lot to learn, clearly. Now, he also includes himself in the same conversation, but note the tense of the bridge. He had to learn who he is, with the implication that she doesn't know, and when she does it, it's obviously with him. Because to quote the most reprehensible line of the entire song, "God knows we're worth it." And that's what really flips the berserk button for me. The religious trappings around this clingy, sickening, underwritten trash highlights and paints this relationship as the furthest thing from healthy. And yet when you know that this sort of song could be used for trapping escapees from a cult, and is weapons grade designed to appeal to the sensitive nice guy set who believes they can always win her back, it reeks of smothering, unearned presumption. Any relationship with a guy from DriveBy, it'd be a bad fling and a worse hangover. With the protagonist from this song, he's got the toxicity that lingers for years to come. A song that's absolutely worth hating for its brand of enablement. And yet it's not the worst of 2012. And before we get to that, the dishonorable mentions.
Young to die, come on and turn me on, turn me on, turn me on, turn me on, turn me on.
Seriously, for as much shit as the Starships get from Nicki Minaj as being a pop sellout moment, Turn Me On has always been on another tier of awful. Stuttering incoherence from the little rapping we get, a beat that tries for scope and then hammers into shrill, whistling bludgeons. Somehow it manages the horrifying feat of stripping away Nicki Minaj's personality and somehow transmogrifying it in a sound that is just as annoying. Seriously, we let David Guetta have a pass for way too long.
You are the one, picture I be, my love is your love is mine.
So 2012 was a bad year for Rihanna, and by the end of the year she would put out one of her most tired and awful albums to date in Unapologetic. But that's not to take away from the charting hits that she had this year from the previous project, which seemed to have utterly misplaced any sort of attempt at reggae groove with canned, blocky fizz, gutless guitars, and badly placed synth effects that sound like the furthest thing from sexy or interesting. And that's where we get the choppy, half-formed faux dubstep on the bridge. But it's the vocal line that sealed this song's position on the list. Rihanna has gradually grown into a more textured and interesting singer as the 2010s has worn on, but this is her at her worst. Braying, but sounding utterly checked out, with another stuttered hook that does her no good and no favors. And yes, somehow it gets worse from here.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone.
Remember My Life Would Suck Without You? Kelly Clarkson's hit in 2009 that was my favorite hit song of that year? Well, here's a production retread approach that somehow forgot the hook and groove along the way, basically paving the way for Pink to make Blow Me One Last Kiss a few months later. Seriously, the post-breakup angst is both overplayed and underdeveloped, the vocals at their most grating, the piled effects are on top of the mix that doesn't match the guitar rollick that's moving in on the verses, and just like Pink, it's a pop rock move that signaled a serious lack of quality in anything to come. From Kelly Clarkson, what a disappointment. What a shame.
Girl, let me love you, and I will love you until you learn to love yourself.
Now, for the longest time, I was actually considering the placement of What Makes You Beautiful by One Direction in this spot. But at the end of the day, for as questionable as its central message is, I can't hold that much against those guys because the hook's a monster, and some of the song's inherent clumsiness can be forgiven. They were young. You can credibly argue they didn't know what they were doing. Also, a few months later, Neo would come around and release the same sort of song with damn near the same message, loaded with the same exasperating presumptuousness that's persisted his entire career, and with a co-writing credit from Sia that in retrospect makes way too much sense, especially given how the song has no real groove to it. Also, some of the worst and tinny synth mixing I've heard in 2012 in its dance pop pivot, but even if Neo had stuck to R&B, this would have still stunk. And now this was a slot that was originally going to be filled by Justin Bieber's Boyfriend, a Mike Posner co-written mess that's trying way too hard to be Justin Timberlake and features some hilariously stupid lyrics. But at the end of the day, I can tolerate Boyfriend. I can't tolerate As Long As You Love Me, which steals the name from a Backstreet Boys song that's actually not great, but I like it more than this, and features howling dubstep, Justin Bieber trying to sell melodrama with no convincing vocal gravitas, and Big Sean. And it's Big Sean's verse is the real problem. Not only does he open his line asking whether his next string of cornball references will make sense, the larger problem is the tone. The song is trying to sell hard drama, but Big Sean's reference pool are dad jokes you find rejected on Facebook, all the while pondering whether or not he should just chase over another girl. Kind of undercuts all your sincerity, dude. In comparison with a song like Dance Ass, which somehow is swung into so stupid it's kind of hilarious territory and actually has aged way better than you would expect, this is just unlistenable. Next.
Rack City, bitch. Rack City, bitch. 10, 10, 10, 20s on your titties, bitch. 100 deep, VIP, no guest list. TT Raw, you don't know who you fucking with.
You know, there's a part of me that perversely doesn't hate this, even though I really should. Mostly because I think Tyga could release this now and it would probably still chart. Yeah, it's a bad song, but the minimalist low end and gang vocals courtesy of DJ Mustard starting out, the outlandish reference points, Tyga has your grandmother on his dick, and apparently you know what it is. As he apparently is not selling weed, along with some really dated Michael Jackson and basketball references as he takes his shirt off at the club. No, I'm not gonna do it, stop asking. If you flip this to any number of interchangeable trap artists now and you throw on a hi-hat, nothing would really change. Of course it would still suck now too, but the point remains.
We got a good thing. Don't know if I'ma see you again, but is that a good thing? 'Cause girl, I can't be your man. No man.
You know, it's not uncommon for some artists to hate their first hit, but it seems like a significant portion of J. Cole's career arc has been built on trying to eliminate this song from existence. He hates this track. He wrote a song called Let Nas Down about how this song disappointed Nas to such an extent, and yet with some twisted irony, I can still see the traces of J. Cole that persist from around this song, namely surrounding his overplayed, slightly condescending attitude towards women with the wannabe player demeanor that reeks of hypocrisy. Hell, the content isn't all that far removed from verse on that last Revenge of the Dreamers project that he's putting out now. What's exasperating is that beyond that, there's actually kind of a good hook here, especially with the liberal Kanye West sample and the Paula Abdul interpolation and the slight G-Funk vibe. I dare say I like the majority of the production here in comparison with what J. Cole's been producing for the last 4 or 5 years, except for that weird tinny clip piece at the very top of the percussion line. I don't know if it's sloppy mixing or that the inferior inferior audio quality on earlier versions of the song prevented folks from hearing it at the time, but once you hear it, you'll never be able to stop hearing it. And yeah, it was that tone that nearly pushed it onto the list proper. No wonder nobody likes to remember this much, including J. Cole. And now back to the list proper, number 1. Okay, once again, obvious choice for me. A lot of critics have highlighted this as one of the worst songs of 2012, indicative of two artists hitting career low points in a collaboration that seemed questionable from every angle. And yet, like with Workout by J. Cole, it seems like a song that not only do neither artist particularly care to bring up, but also seems like how the internet is actively trying to erase its existence as a profound mistake that charted for all the wrong reasons. There's no music video, it's not on the majority of streaming services, which for a major remix and collaboration like this, you would expect, even despite the controversy, but it seems at some point, everybody involved realized this was a turd and it should be buried or burned. But I remember, and thus you have to as well. The remix of Birthday Cake was a mistake. At the time, Rihanna claimed that she didn't expect any sort of negative backlash for working with Chris Brown, right around the same time he was facing a backlash of his own for being a self-righteous shitlord after the Grammys. And if that's not a sign that her handlers were milking her career for all it was worth to the point of exhausting her, I don't know what is. She sounds utterly checked out on this song. And if you think she was trying to go for some form of sensuality, blatant given the undercooked failure otherwise known as the lyrics, you then get a whirling buzzsaw of synth tones, clapping percussion, alarm sounds, telling, no coherent tune, and her repeating the word cake until your eyes and ears start leaking blood. And then Chris Brown shows up to emphasize how much he wants to fuck her in the worst way and blow her candles out. I mean, forget the fact that the sexual metaphors can't even try to make sense. How in the nine hells did anyone think it was a good idea to mention doing it in the worst way, or emphasizing exactly how long he's been missing her body? Because, you know, you put her in the hospital, Chris. That's not even getting into the incorporation of children's nursery rhymes cadences for additional levels of ick. You know, with the same cadences that Chris Brown would later use on Turn Up the Music. So not only is he a hack, but a derivative hack at that. And I'm left asking what even the purpose of all this was. The only way I can see anyone remotely justifying this is provocation. Cheap sexual innuendo between an abuser and his ex maybe taking him back. Getting big on a cheap strip club beat and the ugly controversy of the reunion. But once you get past all the shock, there's just nothing here. Blunt repetition that's something close to sexy or kinky or atmospheric between two people who should have never fucked to begin with and who had little coherent chemistry on this song. It's just annoying and sloppy. It makes me question the judgment of everybody involved, both Chris Brown, Rihanna, and all their handlers. If you want your dark and kinky strip club anthem, because there is a need for that, Body and Blood by Clipping is right there, people. And that's before The Weeknd tore a swath through a lot of similar territory with an actual tune behind him. Go look up 6 Feet Under with Future. It's great in that lane. But you know what? Even if you want to like this purely on bad taste and melodrama, there's no layers, there's no staying power to it. Just production that sounds like a malfunctioning dental drill. In other words, to the surprise of nobody, you can't tell, handily the worst song of 2012. And given that Chris Brown seems to have learned nothing, as nobody has any clue when Rihanna's gonna release any more music, let's throw this back in the memory hole. It belongs there. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Please tell me what you think your worst hits of 2012 are. I am fascinated to see where that list is going to wind up going. Comments down below. Happy to hear from you. But hey, if you're looking to actually have anything to say about my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for episodes of Billboard Breakdown, or looking for other, whenever I put up more future videos on this channel, links are all in the card right over here. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.